Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Gareth Hughes. Tēnā koe, Mr. Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. First up, I'd like to wish Roland a very happy birthday, Mr. Speaker, one of the very hard-working parliamentary staff, and we wish him all the best, and I hope you and all the rest of the staff have a fantastic Easter break. Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak to oppose this bill. The Green arguments why us and Mana are the only parties opposing it have been laid out very well by my colleagues Holly Walker and Jan Logie, so I'm going to take a short contribution. Mr. Speaker, the Student Loan Amendment Bill number 2, it's quite a common name. We've had a number of these legislations over the last 10 plus years. But Mr. Speaker, while it has a common and maybe boring title, I think a more accurate title would be the Focusing on the Small Things Bill, perhaps the Tinkering Around the Fringes Bill, or the Fiddling While Rome Burns Bill. Because, Mr. Speaker, we really have to question the priorities of this government at a time when students and graduates are struggling, and they really are struggling with the economy under that $12 billion millstone, that $12 billion debt, which is around those nearly 500,000 graduates and students next, that this government would spend their scarce parliamentary time, their scarce governmental focus on broadening the definition of adjusted net income and net income to align with the definition used for working for families tax credits, and then secondly, introducing an information match with a customs service. Mr. Speaker, there's some huge fundamental questions facing our country, and particularly our students and graduates, but at the heart, this government is tinkering around the edges, but what they're really doing is focusing their attention in an anti-education stance, which we've seen very clearly over the 4 to 5 years the National Party has been in power. I mean, let's just list some of them, Mr. Speaker. We've seen considerable and significant year-on-year funding cuts. We've seen our universities decline down the international rankings. We've seen lifetime limits to student loans. We've seen restricted access to over 55-year-olds. We've seen the government decide how student levies should be spent, not students, as they go ahead and gut our student associations around the country. We've seen the government restrict access to permanent residents to access student loans. We've seen the government literally lock the door. They've locked the door to thousands of students with their punitive retroactive rules, incredibly those prospective postgrad students. I've paid off my student loan, Mr. Sabin, thank you very much. But we know New Zealanders are struggling with that $12 billion because this government just isn't supporting them. This government isn't supporting them, Mr. Speaker. Let's go through that list because we've still got quite a bit more of the anti-education initiatives we've taken from this government, Mr. Sabin. We've seen the government introducing...
Point of order, sir. Point of order.
Point of order, the honourable member, Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not appropriate for a member of this House to say that another member of this House is lying. I would ask that you ask the member here to apologise for his comment.
The member's absolutely right. We do not refer to members lying in this House because it actually brings disrepute to the House of Parliament itself. If the member did that, I'd ask him to stand, withdraw and apologise because it's an infringement against the House.
I apologise.
Thank you. Call the honourable member Gareth. And also I might add too, sorry Mr Hughes, when we're on the crossbenches, it's common courtesy and it's also convention that members don't interject on each other in those positions because of the muffled effect it can have on the microphones. Call the honourable member Gareth Hughes.
Good stuff, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Just continuing on that list of the anti-education initiatives we've seen under this current government, they've locked the door to thousands of students. They've unfortunately for them, they couldn't reintroduce interest on student loans because it was just so popular to New Zealanders. So what they did is introduce it by stealth with a new class of special fees, which they've put on student loan graduates and students. They've abolished the loan repayments, the carrots, the incentives, if you will. They've increased the repayment rates to 12% of gross salary. All in all, Mr. Speaker, under National, what we've seen is tertiary education become more expensive, less accessible, and in some cases downright impossible as they lock the door to students who want to study, who want to upskill, who want to contribute to our economy, but this government's made it hard and more expensive and in some cases impossible. Mr. Speaker, it's not smart economics. We know across the ditch the Australians have invested in the tertiary education sector. They've spent $5.7 billion over 4 years. We know the New Zealand spend As on the second half of the OECD average, for Mr Bennett's information, Mr Speaker, as a percentage we spend less than most other OECD countries. It's not smart for our economy. Mr Speaker, I struggle to think of a single positive thing this government, particularly under Stephen Joyce, has done for tertiary education. I seriously do struggle to think of a positive initiative. But in contrast, what the Green Party would do is actually prioritise it, because it's in our economic interest. We want to support our students. We want to support our graduates. It's in our economic interest, and this is what I just don't get from the National Party. You know, they're penny pinching and reducing access to education, yet they're finding billions of dollars for motorways to bail out various industries, to subsidise fossil fuel polluters. I think the priorities of this government are just around the wrong way, Mr Speaker. So we see this as yet another tinkering around the edges with this bill. This bill does three main things, which we have some issues with. The first is the definition of income. One of the two main parts of this bill is problematic in the way it relates to the Working for Family changes, because with your Working for Families calculation, your loan repayment, which the government in the budget last year increased from 10 to 12%, isn't taken into account. So while we would prefer that Working for Families was taking into account student loan repayments, because what we don't want to see is our families struggling with those increased repayment thresholds the government brought in. With the customer sharing, we have no issue with that, but it is a reminder to this House that just last year we increased or decreased the overseas holiday repayment time. It was 3 years, and the Green Party originally supported that many years ago. Peter Dunn supported it and spoke very favourably many years ago, but Peter Dunn was the minister who reduced that to 1 year. And again, this is going to have perverse incentives, because Kiwis who are on their OE and traditionally do spend more than 1 year overseas are going to struggle to return to New Zealand, given that repayment year is only a single year now. And lastly, and most egregiously, is again this trend we see with the national government in power, is what I consider the abuse of the Order in Council regulatory making provision inserted into this bill in the Select Committee stage. This government is abusing this quite considerable, powerful tool, where we're seeing less parliamentary oversight of important changes being made. So, in summary, Mr Speaker, this bill tinkers round the edges while $12 billion in debt is still negatively impacting our students and graduates, on top of all the negative initiatives this government's taken to students. It's clear they're not out for students, they're not out for a smart economy, but that's what the Greens would focus on. It's what we would prioritise, because it's in our economic interest, Mr Speaker. And when people are going to the election and thinking about their votes, those students will be voting Green, they won't be voting National, and people who care about the future of our economy, they'll be voting Green. Kia ora, Mr Speaker.
Have we quite finished? Good.
Mr Speaker.
I call the honourable member John Hayes.